I'm JG Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. Second episode released today. Before we get to who's coming on the show, I need to remind you that this show is almost entirely listener funded, so please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews, or if you can, share the show. Get the show out there so that more people will listen and maybe they'll become supporters on Patreon. This is already shaping up to be a really, really busy month for me, so I could really use that support on Patreon at patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. And also check out my one sponsor, Mike Swanson of Wall Street Window. He runs a really great newsletter. It's free of charge. Sign up for it. Mike's got one of the best financial and trading newsletters around. He's a straight shooter. I've had... Sorry about that. Got a bit tongue-tied there. Don't know why. Anyways, I've had listeners that make a return on investment due to Mike's trading tips. So I highly recommend checking out his website, signing up for his free newsletter, wallstreetwindow.com. One more time, that's wallstreetwindow.com. And on this edition of the program, we'll be hearing from the Quincy Institute's Kelley Vlahos, longtime friend of the program. We're going to be talking about the House Armed Services Committee and how they dealt with the controversies around Section 224 of the 2027 NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. If you haven't heard my interview with Ben Freeman, you may want to listen to that, as that lays out the issues with the Section 224 element of the NDAA. Basically, the gist of it is that it would lead to a further entrenchment of U.S.-Israeli military integration at a time when the U.S.-Israel special relationship is coming under a lot of intense scrutiny. So, Kelley Vlahos and I will be talking about all that and much more. We'll be talking about Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie and the sort of alliance they have with each other, what they're working on together to push back against Section 224, all that and much more in the conversation to follow. Give it a listen. And with that being said, let's get right to it with Kelley Vlahos. Welcome back to Parallax Views. One of my favorite guests. She's been one of the earliest Parallax Views guests that I always like having on.
Yeah.
Kelley Vlahos from the Quincy Institute, and she helps run the Responsible Statecraft magazine. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me back. I know it's been a while, but I'm happy and proud that I was one of the first, or at least an early guest.
Right. Well, I've always enjoyed your writing, going back to the days when you were writing about the issues with the troops during the Iraq War and everything else you've done. And I'm happy about this piece you wrote. Pro-Israel voices went out, kill Bill to stop U.S. military integration. I guess I'm not happy about what happened, but I'm happy that you wrote about it. Can you run down what happened? Because my listeners already know what Section 224 is in the NDAA, but what happened at the actual, I think it was the House Armed Services Committee?
Yes, it was the House Armed Services Committee. So they had the first markup of the NDAA in the committee last week. I believe it was Thursday, but don't quote me on that. And so they had pages and pages and reams of proposals to go through, but 224 was one of them. And Ro Khanna was one of two members of the committee who spoke out against it. He made a full-throated argument against not integrating, or at least pursuing greater integration between the U.S. and Israeli militaries. He said this was not in the U.S. interest. This was not America first. He very strategically did not criticize President Trump. He just said, listen, President Trump ran on an America first foreign policy. This is not America first. We do not work for Benjamin Netanyahu. He does not have a say on this committee. He raised the issue of Benjamin Netanyahu sending an endorsement of not this, I don't think it was this particular section, but another section that would mandate, I think, greater intelligence sharing, but don't quote me on that. But there had been some endorsement by Benjamin Netanyahu of this greater integration writ large. He raised that and he said, listen, he doesn't get a say in what we do here in the United States Congress, and we should vote against this section. We are in the middle of a war that the Israelis had helped to get us into. We need to focus on that and not pulling them further into our business. And he was only joined by Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs from California, who made in part a human rights argument against this integration. She said, listen, Israel has been engaging in a war against Palestinians in Gaza. They have slaughtered some 74,000 people. They are starving them. They are annexing the West Bank. They are bombing and displacing people in South Lebanon. This is not the time to reward them with further integration and further access to the U.S. military and the spoils of the U.S. military. And she made that argument. And they were the lone voices against Section 224. The rest of the remarks made by members of the committee, not all members of the committee made remarks, but I would say there was about seven or eight more. They were all Republicans, except for ranking member Adam Smith. And they all said that this was a great idea. So I would split the voices up like this. There were the voices that say, and I'm paraphrasing, Israel is our best friend in the region. They're the only democracy in the region. They are our partners. We could only benefit by having further integration of the military, further cooperation and defense tech and intelligence and weapons production. This is a win-win for the American people. It's going to create jobs. It's going to make us more safe. And then the other half were folks like Adam Smith, who also did extol the virtues, but also said, listen, the reports about 224 are overstated, that this doesn't create any new authorities, that this doesn't create any new arrangements or further integration. It just creates an executive to oversee the existing cooperation between these two entities. And so they were playing down the reports because obviously it hit a nerve when we first reported it by my colleague, Ben Friedman, that it's just gone viral because people on both sides of the aisle said, well, what is going on here? We're trying to get Israel out of our business and detach ourselves from their crazy, murderous campaigns in the Middle East. And now we have a proposal to give them more weapons and more access to our sensitive information, our co-production of our weapon systems. No, I don't think so. And that went viral. And so some of these guys were responding to that and saying, oh, this is overstated. This is like a lot of pearl clutching. Bottom line is they had a voice vote, so not even a recorded vote, but it was obvious that the yays for Ro Khanna's amendment to strip this language from the NDAA were probably Ro Khanna and Sarah Jacobs and the rest all said, nay, we will not strip this language. And then they passed it. And so as of right now, it's still in the bill. And it's up to Tom Massey and Ro Khanna to try to strip it from the final legislation that the House will ultimately vote on as a body.
Yeah, I was even surprised by some of the language used. I think I even saw that Adam Smith was saying not only is this being overplayed or he was downplaying the claims made by Ben Freeman and others. He said, well, we should do this with Ukraine as well. And I was oh, so I wasn't imagining that.
No, you were not imagining. He kind of slipped that in But basically, his argument was, well, this is such a win-win for both the militaries, this cooperation, that we should consider doing it with Ukraine for their war. Which really landed like a big thud at the Quincy Institute because we're like, okay, another situation where we're trying to extricate from that war. We're trying to pursue some sort of diplomacy and settlement to end it. And here he's suggesting that we not only keep sending weapons, but we open up even more access to our military. And I don't know exactly what he was suggesting, but I think what he was trying to do was to soft pedal the Israeli integration by saying this is something we can do with others like Ukraine. And it didn't go over very well.
I wanted to ask you, so you watched this markup very closely. Beyond the substance of Section 224 itself, what do you think this debate has revealed about the current state of congressional thinking on Israel?
It's not very good. That's all I can say. I mean, what I came away from that hearing with was that for as much progress that we have made outside of Capitol Hill on opening the debate about Israel and how much influence that government has on our foreign policy, which I feel is leaps and bounds ahead of where it was, say, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. I mean, there are some really rigorous conversations happening about getting Israel out of our business and being very straightforward and open about the APAC money, the influence of billionaire dollars like Miriam Adelson on President Trump, the fact that they've dragged us into this war, the fact that they have made us co-conspirators in war crimes in Gaza. That's all open. We were talking about it when 20 years ago, if you peeped about something like that, you would be shut out, blackballed, called an anti-Semite. And so you're in a kind of bubble, if you will. And then you go and you listen to members of Congress, particularly the House Armed Services Committee, and they're talking like it was 10, 20 years ago, that they completely ignore reality. They completely ignore that our foreign policy has been really hijacked by special interests. And they continue to play up Israel as though, this whole business of being the only democracy in the Middle East. I heard one congressman, I don't want to name his name because I don't want to get it wrong, but he said something to the effect of Israel is the only Jewish state surrounded by 50 Muslim countries, as though like a Muslim, like the Muslim countries, just by the fact of being Muslim, were evil and the ne'er-do-wells of the neighborhood, and that the Jewish state had to protect itself, and that we as America had to protect them. Well, we know that they are a nuclear power. We know that they are armed to the teeth thanks to the United States. We know that they can fight for themselves. They're the wealthiest, well, maybe not the wealthiest considering the oil money of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, and Kuwait, but they are the most, their military is the wealthiest and the most high tech in the region, thanks to us. So to act as though, like, if without our assistance, they would be bullied into submission, that they might not even survive, is just ridiculous. It's so old school. And it just reminded me that we can make all sorts of progress outside, but where these laws are being made, the legislation is being passed, money is being approved, the real power is still in Congress and in the White House, and in those spaces, they're living like it's 1999, and we
Not
have a
just
lot of
that,
work to do.
Kelley. Not to interrupt you, but it's not just that. It's also just there was no attempt to grapple with the criticisms. It was, oh, these are rumors. Oh, this is just anti-Semitic. Oh, this is
Absolutely.
overplayed. There's no attempt to grapple with actual concerns. And I mean, I don't think it was just rumor mongering when Ben Freeman and others wrote about this. Steve Simon as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that didn't bother me as much because I have been covering Congress like here in DC for over 20 years, and that's how they behave. Every hearing that I've ever heard, the members don't grapple with the issues. And when I say the issues, when we're talking about war and peace, they avoid reality. And so, yeah, if the reality is we have legislation that would give Israel greater access to production, licensing, technology, data, all of these things, instead of, actually dealing with that and saying, okay, well, maybe that is true or not true, and then maybe arguing whether or not it was as um, ominous as my colleagues were saying. No, you're right. They skipped all over that. Other than saying that it was an exaggeration, they did not want to deal with the facts that this was potentially giving them a backdoor to a lot of things. They weren't dealing with some of the other arguments, like Israel has not always been a good faith actor when it comes to America, and has been spying on us and has given sensitive information to China and to Russia. None of those complaints were dealt with, and none of the humanitarian arguments were dealt with either. That we are giving billions of dollars to a country that is using the weapons to slaughter children. That wasn't dealt with. And above all of that was the argument, I think Roe made this during the hearing, that they just want to ensure that they will continue to get billions of dollars from the American taxpayer, but they are shifting it to the Pentagon and inside the Pentagon through these, integration schemes, so that Congress doesn't have to approve a big memorandum of understanding for another 10 years, and that it won't be subject to State Department laws that say that they can't use those weapons for slaughtering children and committing war crimes like starving populations and whatnot.
It's a
And so
way to
this
bypass transparency.
Exactly. And so they didn't, and you're right, they didn't deal with that argument either. They just went on the offensive to say, A, it was all a big exaggeration in everybody's imagination, or B, they just said, oh, how great Israel is, and we should be happy to have such cooperation and such new relationships with them. And honestly, it just came off as like, some of these, and again, I'm not going to name names, but some of these guys sounded like they were just trying to please their APAC minders. Like, hey, I got a boatload of money, and I have to prove how loyal I am, or to Israel, because they were kind of just mouthing all of these platitudes about how wonderful Israel was.
Right. Didn't
And
one of them actually go on about Tel Aviv is the second Silicon Valley?
yes, yes.
Oh my gosh.
This was, and I have it in front of me. This was Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska, Republican. He says, we have Silicon Valley, Israel has Tel Aviv, and it's like Silicon Valley #2. And and he says it's a win-win relationship. And then so you had that tone, and then you had Ronnie Jackson, Republican from Texas, who was saying that like American national security would be at risk if we didn't pass these integration schemes. Basically that after the bad actors, that's what he named them as, the bad actors like go after Israel, then they will exercise their free will against us. And then so there was this scaremongering about Iranian ballistic missile production and things that we supposedly destroyed in the war, suddenly were reasons why we needed to pass this legislation. Because if we didn't, they were going to send ballistic missiles to hit California. So it was crazy town, and not altogether unsurprising, a little depressing, and it shows you that, the Democrats who didn't pipe up, and we have no idea how they voted because they didn't have a recorded vote. They just stayed quiet, and that's too bad. I think if there had been maybe a few more people to call this out as the sham it is, the shell game it is, it might have made Democrats look a little better. But yeah, it was pretty sad.
I know we only have a few more minutes, but I wanted to ask you how significant do you think it was that Representative Sarah Jacobs, Democrat from California, raised the issue of the Pegasus spyware that's Israeli owned? Because we're seeing Israeli spying in the news again now with that report that the Pentagon is on critical alert for Israeli spying.
Absolutely. I was very impressed that she brought that up. And, and she brought it up, and coincidentally, 2 days later, we get that NBC report that there had been a critical threat alert by I believe it was the DIA, or no, it was the Pentagon's intelligence agency, basically warning against Israel spying had gone off the rails. So, she's pointing this out about Pegasus, which is an Israeli spyware by an Israeli company, a private company that sold the spyware to all these countries, and then it was being used to spy on American journalists and some officials, and they got blacklisted. And so they have been lobbying, and she mentioned this too, which I thought was good. She mentioned that they've been lobbying really hard to get off that list so they can continue to do business, and they would likely be a company that would try to do business with the Pentagon under this new cooperative scheme, because the crux of this scheme is not only the co-production of weapon systems, but like the cooperation or collaboration on defense tech and AI and surveillance. And that's big time. And the whole idea of Israeli companies who are notoriously selling spyware that allows them back doors into our personal information and our government systems, and to make that to institutionalize that through Congress and the U.S. military is it's outrageous. And so she was spot on with that. I mean, I don't know if you have time, but things get worse because Tom Cotton has introduced his own section 622, and we're going to have a story about that in Responsible Statecraft by Paul Pillar, which basically mandates, quote, U.S.-Israeli intelligence sharing enhancement. So it institutionalizes and expands intelligence sharing that already exists with Israel, puts it on the books, makes it impossible for new administrations or new Congresses to get rid of unless they jump through a bunch of hoops. And this all comes at a time, as you said, when it's becoming increasingly clear that Israel doesn't have our interests. They don't have to have our interests. They're their own country. But they certainly aren't looking out for us. And we need to really take hold here and say, okay, we're in this war because of Israel. We need to get out of it. We shouldn't be passing new laws that would make them more fully entrenched in our foreign policy and our national security state. So keep an eye on Tom Cotton's proposal too,
because that's in the Senate.
Yes. So they got their own NDAA. The House has theirs. They'll pass them, and then they do the whole, reconciliation of both. So yeah. Scary stuff. And does Tom Cotton have the best interests of the American people in mind? What is this? Please.
No, I mean, Real
Yeah.
quick, if I could just add to that. I mean, just
Yeah.
seeing the way Israeli officials and even Israeli celebrities talk about America is grotesque at this point. I saw a few months back that the traitor and spy Jonathan Pollard was talking about how Israel should threaten the U.S. with nukes. He called them
Yes.
unconventional weapons. And then you have Itamar Ben-Gvir saying it's time to say no to Trump, even though he's the president of the United States. This is all very grotesque.
It's very anti-American. And as Tucker Carlson pointed out when he did his interview with Ambassador Huckabee months ago, the notorious interview where he got Huckabee to say that Israel should control the Middle East according to the Bible, that it had justification in the Bible to grab more territory for itself. Same interview, he asked him, "Well, why did you visit or have Jonathan Pollard visit the U.S. embassy in Israel? Like, what was that all about? Like, was this guy was convicted and was imprisoned for stealing U.S. secrets and giving them to Russia? And this is during the 80s when the Soviet Union was still in power. And so, like, what were you doing? And Huckabee acted as though, well, Pollard did something. He had consoled his wife after the death of a family member. Like, it was the silliest, flimsiest retort that I had heard. And I'm sorry if I'm not getting it straight, but he really didn't have an answer to that. And the piece that we're going to be putting up on responsible statecraft points out, like, you really want to further enhance intelligence sharing with Israel when the best known spy case, Jonathan Pollard, basically said, was accused by then Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger, who said that it was difficult to conceive of a greater harm to national security than caused by the defendant, Pollard, in view of the breadth, the critical importance of the U.S., and the high sensitivity of the information that he sold to Israel, which then he also, and I got that wrong, he was also offering the same information to Russia at the time during the Soviet Union, but he sold it to Israel. And here's a guy who's like a guest at the U.S. Embassy. And as you mentioned, he's free now. And when he was freed by Trump, well, he did his time and then Trump got him back to Israel, they gave him a hero's welcome. It's like you said, it just boggles the mind.
Real quick here, I just wanted to say right before you got on, I was reading an article in The Independent, and I'll just say what the headline was. We don't have to get into it. Trump to massively expand U.S. intelligence sharing with Israel.
Yeah.
It's wild. Closing out here, the last thing I wanted to ask you, I promise to let you go after this, is listen, you mentioned Tucker Carlson. I know I don't always agree with Tucker. I have my issues. There's always left and right are always quibbling with each other. But we see this sort of work that Ro Khanna and Massey are doing. How far do you think this can go? And how important is it that there does need to be a little bit of teamwork from both left and right to deal with this issue, putting aside all the other disagreements we may have?
Well, I mean, I had seen both men together, Ro Khanna and Massey, when Quincy gave them the Quincy Award for peace. This was in the December of 2025, and there was a real chemistry there. This isn't confected. Hi, we're going to put on a little show, left and right, crossing the aisle. I really feel that they respect each other and acknowledge that each other has something to gain by working across the aisle and specifically working with each other. And I do think that you're seeing relationships like that forming by people who remain open-minded, committed to the issues. And for them, it's the issues of, diplomacy, restraint in foreign policy, what's in the best interest of their constituency in terms of like the money being spent in Washington on war, the money being spent on weapons going to other countries. Like, these are shared values, and they are focused on those, and instead of all of the other politics that often divide Republicans and Democrats. And so I'm really impressed. So I do think there is a lot of skepticism over whether left and right can get together on these issues. I
It's
am
been
all
done
for
before,
it.
though. Not to
Yeah.
interrupt you. It's been done before with Rand Paul and Bernie Sanders on
Oh,
the M and War
yeah.
Powers Act, and also between Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul worked on things together. So
Absolutely. Ilhan Omar was working with Matt Gaetz on getting troops out of Syria, from what I can remember. Hope I'm not butchering that memory. But yeah, Matt Gaetz working on war powers to get troops out of Syria. And I think he did have a number of squad members working with him on that. So yes, it can be done. I guess it's the, for how long, how deep the relationship can go. I do think that the more faith that we have in this sort of left-right conversion, bringing more people on board is only going to help, because I think it's around election time that these things tend to fall apart, because all of a sudden everybody's got to put on their team shirt and get in their corner. And I'm feeling a little bit of a different vibe these days. Tucker Carlson has been very consistent no matter who's been in the White House. MTG pretty much tanked her own congressional career to go up against the president. She's, willing to work across the aisle. So I do think that, there are some people who have transcended the politics, or at least the electoral politics, because they do believe that this is much more important than electing people. Because if you're electing people who are going to work against American interests once they get into office, like, what's the point of wasting all that time and energy, politicking for them?
well, thank you again, Kelley Vlahos, for coming on Parallax Views. Let my listeners know how they can keep up with your work, and if you can, just plug the Tripping the Beltway Fantastic.
Oh, sure. Yes. So I'm the editor-in-chief at Responsible Statecraft. So please come to Responsible Statecraft to see all our great work. And I also have this podcast called Trip the Beltway Fantastic, and you can find that on Substack and on YouTube, Spotify. So it's both, video and audio only.
A special thanks to my $10 and above tier supporters on Patreon, who make this show possible with their generous donations. Producers credits shout out to those supporters: Aaron, Fabian, Jeremy, Matt, Big Bob's Beepers, James, Enoch, David, Sadad, Tristan, Bob, Eva, Miriam, West Bank Robbery Pod, B. Lund, Transnatural Perspectives Podcast, Dan, Nick, Elliot, Fabian, Tom, Arlen, Bo, Spartacus, James, G, Jamie, Will, JC, WV, Sutra, Orc, Catherine, Aaron, Darko, Nathan, Holland, Dan, Mark, Chase, Olm, Gary, Nobody, Emilia, Nick, Brace, Michael, and Brian. Please join those listeners in supporting me at the $10 and above tier of my Patreon page, patreon.com/parallaxviews, if you'd like your very own producer's credit on each and every edition of the program. Until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff. It's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.